Hi, Kim. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Ashley. Glad to be here.
So, this is a little podcast swap. But what my audience should know in advance of us starting is that Kim is a friend of mine from a very long time ago. Our mothers used to play tennis together, and both of them were very good social tennis players that played a lot. Um, and Kim, I don't know if I told you this in person. I know you saw it online, but when I broke my back in 1993, your mom, who is such a
Yeah.
lovely lady, brought me this angel, and I had a four-poster bed, and it sounds so idyllic. My mom played tennis, and I had a four-poster bed.
I know the real truth.
It really kind of was that disgusting. Um, and anyway, she came with, like, raffia, this angel, and I've always had a thing for angels. And I read a lot about angels and just have always cared a lot about angels. Anyway, your mom, gave me this angel, and she got kinda tied up to the poster that was closest to my head, and she still is on that bed at my mom and dad's house.
That is so cool. Yeah, my mom was so good about just noticing what people need and giving them love and attention when they most needed it.
Yeah. And that's something that you have, carried forth, and that's what we're going to be, talking about on the episode today. Um, so I knew you first as a mom to 3 at that time, 3 kids, and part of your story is that 3 became more, and so we'll talk about that, but, at our local pool where I coached swimmers, and then we've connected beyond that,
Yeah.
because of the way that our professional lives and our values have kind of intertwined along the way. So, why
Our
don't we get
passion.
our passion? That's it. That's what it is. Um, why don't we get started with having you do a little introduction? Tell us about your work, your family, and why you're involved in the disability community.
Okay. So I do have 3 kids that were coached by you, Ashley, on the swim team. But then there became 5 because we adopted our 2 youngest, one at 10 and one at the age of 15 from an orphanage in Ukraine. And that really started me on this journey of kids who, because of their backgrounds or because of the way their brains are wired, they have behaviors that sometimes we don't understand. So I went to training on trauma informed care, on neurodivergence, on sensory differences. And at the time, I was leading a large ministry, kids and student ministry at Crossroads, which is in Kentucky and Ohio. Did that
And
for
we would call that a mega church, right? Like, it's a
but
really big church
yeah,
community.
that's a
Yeah,
mega it's a mega church.
yeah.
Yeah, 11 sites, tens of thousands of people.
Humongous.
Yes, but the great thing about that is because it had 11 sites, these strategies that we were trying out with our staff and our volunteers, we would do it in a site that had 15 kids in a very suburban environment. We would do it at a site that had 2,000 kids in a more urban environment. And these strategies work no matter what. And it was during that I just I noticed that there were kids that were being turned away from churches because of their behaviors, families who couldn't go to church. And also what they experienced at church was very similar to what they were experiencing in the school and in the neighborhood and on the baseball team. So I mean, and we're very similar in that, Ashley. I mean, those are the kids we care about. We want to help them find their place and find their people. And I will add, so initially we were friends just because we were doing the same thing, but now we're friends because we're real friends
Yeah.
because we are passionate about the same thing. And so what I do now, I did after working at Crossroads, I worked for a new nonprofit in Cincinnati for a couple years with multi-system involved youth, which I learned a ton about
Yeah.
that. Most of them or all of them were under the care of Child Protective Services, and they were involved in other systems as well. And so now what I do is I just try to help people create spaces where every kid can contribute. Because no matter how your brain's wired, you want to contribute. No matter what disabilities you might have, you want to have friends. So that's my story. And I have one of
Three cheers.
5 kids, 1 husband, and 11 as of like 10 days ago, 11 grandkids.
Yeah. That's
Mm,
so exciting. I heard that through the grapevine, and we already chatted. I'm so excited about that little baby. Um, so super, super exciting stuff. And yeah, I mean, I think that's what's really cool is that, a lot of times we have like the professional toolkit um to get started, and then our life's experiences take us down this road where we just kind of have the skills that we need in order to really help communities. And I know you do a lot of speaking at conferences and a lot of networking within faith communities and other communities in order to um, promote these inclusive practices, and more than the practices, that to help people that have the good heart to provide the skill strategies and tools to make people successful, and that's really what it's all about. um so the exciting thing about this is that you've written a book, so why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, and what it's about.
okay. So it's called Boundless Hope for Every Child, because I believe that when we lose hope for a kid, then our responses to them are not going to be helpful. And then it has the longest tagline ever. It's help for the hurting, compassion for the misunderstood, and belonging for the lonely. Because that's what we all need. We all need help. We all need compassion. We all need to feel a sense of belonging. And so many of these kids, especially the kids who've experienced trauma or whose brains are wired differently, they're lonely and they're misunderstood. So that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, and what I think is so beautiful about the book, and I it's on my list. The reason why I haven't read the book yet is because I want to read the book. I don't want to skim through the book to compliment you on it. I don't want to skim through the book to prepare for a podcast interview. I want to consume the book without distractions, and it is championship swim season at my house. And so I
Yeah.
have I have a
Lots of
month where I need Ellen Hildebrand or Colleen Hoover. I don't need books that are going to touch my soul because my soul is very tender. Um, but what I love about you, Kim, because I've obviously read excerpts and I have kind of weighed in on various parts of the book, is you use your bevy of experience, you use your profession, like your professional experience, but you also use professional training. You use a ton of research, and you use colloquial experience and anecdotal stories from other people, and yet you assimilate this into these very simple truths that, it, from my perspective, my audience, which is primarily parents of kids in special education, can take and can disseminate widely, can say, hey, it's not that hard. Here's all you need to do. And I love that mentality that you have of here's all you need to do. I mean, we're talking about big things like hope and belonging. And you're like, here's all you need to do. Um, so that's my compliment. I think my
Thank
next
you.
question, because I don't know that you're welcome. Um, I don't know that I've ever asked you this question, and that is, why did you decide to write the book?
Well, I I do speak a lot, and people wanted, rather than just to hear something for an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours, the training, like, I want something I can take back to my other people. I wrote it for churches and educators and organizations, but what the interesting thing is the launch team and some of the early readers have been reading, the parents are coming, and I didn't write it for the parents because parents have too much pressure on them already, and I didn't want them to feel the pressure of, "This is how I have to extend grace, I have to be curious." Because sometimes as a parent, you actually need to just go in your room and cover up with a blanket and read a mindless novel. But the parents are reading it and saying, "Oh, I feel so heard. I feel so known. I see myself in these stories. Oh, now I have the language where I can go to people that I know that the way they interact with my kid isn't helpful and is actually harmful. Like, oh, now I have a little bit of science to back it up. I have some phrase because I'm going, yeah, like just use some of these phrases as your own scripts, like take them." So that has been the most encouraging thing to me as early readers. had been reading it because so many parents, like you, Ashley, you guys also feel misunderstood
Yeah.
intimately, and you're hurting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like, that's I mean, that's like an entrepreneur's dream is you had this idea, you developed this idea in business, then you took it on the road and you started speaking about it. And then that helped you to develop because you got this like worldly experience and you figured out that the stuff you're talking about works from coast to coast, from top to bottom across the world and in particular communities and in a wide array of communities. Um and then people were like, "And we want this permanently. We don't just wanna come hear you talk about it for 90 minutes. We want this to live on our bookshelves in our houses forever, and we want to use it as a resource, not just an experience that lives in the cells of our body." Um,
But
and so
I
it's
wanna
gonna work.
yeah, but the thing about it is, it's not rocket science.
No.
It's basically how to be a decent human being to other human beings, especially human beings who have behaviors that are confusing, and needs that you don't understand.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about being curious, it's about being kind, it's about not making assumptions about somebody.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, just often that's not the way we operate, especially with the adults and kids. There's that power differential. And I was just talking to a teacher the other day who said, I know they can do it. They've done it before. So I know they can do it. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
maybe they can't do it today
Right.
if we just forget. Cause I don't know about you, Ashley. Like when you swam, you probably had some days where you did really awesome and other days where you didn't. Well, people aren't coming to you and going, "Ashley, you did 2 seconds faster. What's wrong with you?"
Right.
No, you just have days that your capacity is different.
Yeah, I mean, I literally just talked to, 2 families. I have these families that I have on, like, monthly retainer where they just hop on a 30-minute call or Zoom with me, and we get, like, down and dirty. "What's the problem? Here's my idea. What's the problem? Here's my idea. Here, let me send this paragraph to you, and now you send that out," kinda stuff, and I had 2 of those today, and both of them, I said, "We have to make the closet messy before we can clean it again." So we're
Mhm.
gonna have to, like, teach this skill before we give them the independence to use it. We're going to have to dive a little deeper into this behavior before we can, convince anybody that a particular tool basically is going to work. And I think that's what you're saying. But then also, like, it's not just kids with disabilities that need this. One of my favorite things that I ever read, the author's name is Glennon Doyle. Do you know her?
Yes, yes.
So Glennon writes, she wrote like a blog post one time. I don't know if it's in one of her books, but the blog post says it's too hard to carpe an entire diem, like seize the entire day. That
Yeah.
is intimidating. But she says, what about carpe kairos, seize a moment? And that's
Yes.
really about like enjoying the
Really.
moments. And I think that's so important in the disability community to
Yeah.
like really enjoy those couple of minutes of success or really dive into just a little bit of work or a little bit of joy, a little bit of sensory work, whatever it is with your family member in your case. And and then like just give yourself a break.
Right. Go hide in the closet for a little bit.
It's not that hard. Okay, so I want to talk to you about, basically what churches and communities need to do. Um But first, I know that you talked to some really cool people along the way. And so I want to hear about some of those conversations that you had with people as you were researching the book and as you were writing the book. And like what families and leaders and teachers and coaches, what these people and communities had to say. Like, what do we need and what is their experience?
Well, I think in talking to families with kids who, have big behaviors or concerning behavior, because a concerning behavior actually might be a really small behavior.
Yeah.
It's the kid who's not responding. But what I found is the families feel very misunderstood. Their kids are dismissed. They aren't given credit for what they're capable of. They they feel alone. So that's what I'm hearing from the parents. Also along the way, I've got some, like I call them trauma crushes. Bruce Perry has written, oh my gosh, he wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey that is very accessible. If you have never read about trauma at all, it's a great, and he's super smart psychologist, worked with kids from Waco.
Oh,
So
wow.
his whole approach as far as trauma does something to our brain, which then is going to affect the way we interpret the world around us. And the way that healing comes is through relationship. And this guy, prior to being a famous author and speaking all over the place, he got his money doing therapy. And he's
Yeah.
saying the best therapy is human relationship. Now, I'm also all about therapy. I see a therapist, so I'm about therapy. But we discount the difference that we can make. And I think another thing in talking to people is, okay, you read this from Bruce Perry, who's this super smart person. They go, I could never do that. Well, yeah, you can because it's about relationship. And
Mm.
if you have a friend, well, then you know how to build relationships. So you can build relationships with the kids. And in talking to you, one of the smart people that I talked to, um, you talked about, we were talking about this earlier with one of my kiddos. Our kids, their brain may be wired differently, but they pick up on all kinds of stuff we don't think they're picking up on. And if a teacher or a church worker or a coach does not like them, and they might go, they don't know, well, yeah, you can tell in your demeanor. That child then is going to perform differently. And
Yeah.
that's, I don't know how about you, Ashley, but if I have a boss that I don't really think has my best interest in mind, who doesn't think I'm capable of amazing things, I am going to respond much differently
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. Agree entirely. I tell my clients the first time that you sense that, you need to do it with like benefit of the doubt, right? So you need to say, like, hey, I just want to make sure that like he understands that you are that your sentiment is that the behavior is the problem, not him. So we characterize the behavior, not the child, for example. We don't say you were bad. We say that was a bad choice. And I like more words than that, but you understand the idea.
Right.
Um, but then, like, after you've given the benefit of the doubt and you can tell that your kid's EQ is just picking up somebody that doesn't necessarily appreciate them or appreciate their presence in a particular community. I mean, I walked up to a crossing guard one time and said, she was giving him all kinds of business like 3 days in a row, and she would literally cross the kids with her arm extended with her little stop sign out and her back to us. And here I'm trying to say, basically be polite, say hello and thank you. And she didn't so much as grunt back. A grunt would have been more polite than what she did. And then one day she tried to stop him because he was going to run. Admittedly, like close to traffic, he wasn't going to get hurt. And she disciplined him. And I walked him to school, and on my way back, I said, "Hey, if you want him to listen to any kind of correction that you have to offer to him, you're going to have to try to convince him that you like him. And I'm telling you right now, he doesn't think you like him, and you would have to do a lot in order to convince me to. So if you want some skills and strategies, because I had offered 1,000 of them to the group of people to which she subscribed, to like this whole group of crossing guard type people, I said, including expensive cookies, because I was trying to be nice, in the beginning. But I said, if you want some skills and strategies, I'm happy to meet you for coffee. And then I walked away because I'm like, at some point, I'm going to have the awkward conversation for him because he doesn't have that. Well, he does actually have the language to say, I don't think you like me, but he wasn't accessing it because she intimidated him. And I think you're so, so right. So that then leads to something that I think you answer so well. And that is, what do communities need to do? What action steps do they need to take? And I'm particularly interested, Kim, in what communities can do to foster that sense of belonging, because I think that's so that's so natural for churches to provide a sense of belonging. Like, come and gather. That's
Right.
so that's what Jesus taught us to do, as you're saying with this interpersonal thing. So, what can they do?
Well, I think there's a quote by Alexander. I can't remember his last name. He said, if a flower doesn't grow, you don't fix the flower, you fix the environment.
Yeah,
That's paraphrased. So as communities, I think it's us looking at a kid who maybe is always on the outside and we don't see engaging with other people. And if we have a child their age, encouraging them to just go alongside them. And maybe it's something as simple as just sitting with them, sitting nearby them at a sporting event. I mean, it doesn't have, it's just little baby steps. It's also, if we do things like churches, um, somewhere along the line, we thought that the bigger, the better, the louder, that's what we're going for. And for some kids, they simply can't tolerate that.
yeah,
So take in mind, consider all different kinds of, um, sensory needs that people might have, just like educators do. There are different things that different ways that people learn. Some it's listening, some it's seeing, some it's doing. It's a combination. And so I think just being aware that an environment that we think is really fun and awesome might not be fun and awesome for everybody. So look at those kids who are on the outside or the kids who never participate. Go to that family and say, what would be best for your child? We do this big thing every summer in our town. Your family never comes. Can you tell me what could we do where this would feel like a welcoming environment to you? There was a priest. It was actually in Alexandria, Kentucky, which is super close to us, who had a little boy who was getting ready for first communion. And the priest, who didn't have any kids of his own, started getting curious and thinking, wow, first communion might be hard for this little guy who's autistic.
yeah.
Went to the parent and said, what would be best for your child?
Mm.
Like, how awesome is that? So, what they ended up doing is having a midweek first communion for him
Yeah,
because they realized that on the weekend with all those people and all those kids in those fancy clothes who are, high energy because it's a big day for them, that just wasn't going to be best for him. So I would say, put that little script in your pocket. Go up to
yeah,
some, what would be best for your child?
yeah. And that's where Jack's gonna go. Why wasn't he there 10 years or 8 years ago? I mean, and I mean, I think, like, my reaction to that is
Oh,
exactly
wait a minute, Ashley, are you saying he did not do first communion
Jack
because of
didn't get his first communion, that's why we left the Catholic
oh,
Church, they wouldn't let him.
oh, oh,
Yeah, that's
you had
why.
you had Father Joe.
That's is he at St. Mary's?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a wonderful parish, but, like, it's still at the time that we left the Catholic Church, for me, it was like, I'm not driving 20 minutes to church. I'm not fighting that traffic at that intersection to go to church. I shouldn't have to. I fought for kindergarten and I'm out. He was in first grade and I was like, that's the end of that story. Um, but I keep tasting that, like, Jack might be 35 and we might just send him in line. Like, we might teach him and just send him in line and he makes his first communion and nobody knows.
Yeah. Yes, I wanna come. Can I sit behind you and not make a big deal about it?
Yes. Yeah.
And look at just the emotion that that invoked in you
Right.
about all those years ago where Jack, who deserved to be able to do first communion in whatever way was best for him,
Right.
and he didn't get to do it. And it might not be first communion, it might be just participating in a small group, it might be playing basketball. That's
Yeah.
one and I know Jack swims on a team, but that's one thing that a lot of families with kids who have disabilities, who are neurodivergent, they don't get that team, where they get their jerseys, and that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons I love our, one of the elementary schools in town has a bocce ball league,
Yeah.
or and one kid on every team has some type of disability, and they all get jerseys with their names on it, and they're scorekeepers.
Yeah.
So another thing as a community, look at the thing if you have typical kids, look at the thing that your kid enjoys and make sure that there are opportunities for kids who are not typical
Mhm.
to enjoy those same kind of things. Now,
Mhm.
it might not mean that they might not play on the high school baseball team, but maybe you get a bunch of boys who go out to the baseball field every Wednesday night and just run around the bases and hit balls with that kid.
Yeah, and I think that lends to a conversation that I had with a friend a minute ago, so I wanna come back to that, but, I think you hinted on something that's also so important when you're talking to the people in your community. So if you're a leader, whether it's an athletic team or a church or a school, I think another thing to do is when you're thinking about a program, some kind of extracurricular or religious education or anything, to say, "What do you wanna get out of this?" I honestly, as it applied to church, I just wanted Jack to, like, be there. Like, I didn't care if he knew the Apostles' Creed. I didn't care honestly, I didn't care if he made his first communion. I wanted it as part of community because he was repeating the grade, and there were some nice Catholic kids in his original kindergarten class, and I was like, "Oh, he's gonna miss them." It was that simple, but they made it about first communion, which made me feel icky, and I had a trauma response going from our kindergarten transition. Um, but is it like what you were saying about swimming? What they ask me all the time, "Are you okay with this?" And I'm like, "Yes, because I don't care how much exercise he gets. I exercise him. I
Mhm.
care that he's with those kids, that he has the t-shirt, that he's proud to be on a team, that he can access that environment, which is traditionally hard for him. I care about all those other things much more than I care about his times, certainly, or how many calories he's burning. Most
Yes,
swimmers care about time and calories, you know?
yes.
So what are your values around it? And I think, Kim, you do a really good job at helping people to get down to that, like, basic thing, right?
Well, one of the things that I say, and got a whole chapter about in the book, is what's the goal? Which is what you're saying as far as Jack. The swim team is coming to you and they might not use that phrase, "What's the goal?" But that's what they're asking you. And too often, we get confused about the goal. We think that a kid needs to learn a certain amount of Bible verses, but really, maybe what the goal and I would actually propose that this would be a better goal, that we want them to feel safe in the environment. We want them to build relationships with their peers and with their leaders. And when we are able to articulate what our goal is, that will then guide our behavior and what we prioritize.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we should start everything. You
Yeah.
and I live in the shadow of Procter and Gamble, and I have a hilarious story about, to work at P&G. If you aren't from Cincinnati, you might not know
Yes.
this. You have to do this like personality test thing. And so I have a friend who was getting married, and her dad sat down the day after her like fairy tale Cinderella engagement. Well, Cinderella didn't get engaged well, but her fairy tale engagement, and so they're having coffee the next morning and he goes, "Well, Ann, what are your goals for this wedding?" This P&G guy, like,
Uh-huh.
"I want a 9.5 steak at my wedding."
Uh-huh.
But we really should start off on every endeavor. What's my goal? How quickly do I
Yes.
wanna unload the dishwasher?
Right. Well, and you're laughing at the guy asked the question, but I'll say when my firstborn got married, you know, we're like stressing out about all those things. And finally, somebody asked us, "Well, what are your top three priorities?" Well, once we established what the top three priorities for the wedding were, we didn't care about the flowers.
Yep.
There were all kinds of things we didn't care about because we knew it was important. And
Mhm.
especially parents who are raising kids with differences, what is important to them might be different than what is important to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so, my next question, and this wasn't on our little list, this is what happens when
Okay.
you talk to me, as I'm sure you expected. I had a conversation at our coffee shop with a friend, recently who is a, psychologist, and he works only with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we were talking about how abysmal supports and programs and things generally are for adults with disabilities. Um which is a subset of people with whom he typically works, but he also has a personal connection to, youth. And so what I was saying to him kind of ties this is like a cautionary tale that I thought was important, but I want your insight on it. What I was saying to him is, I feel like too many of us don't get started when our kids are 10 and 12 and 14 on carving out what their next space is going to look like. You know, are we doing college? Are we doing a college program? Are we going to employment? Are we going to live in our same bedroom or in the basement or in a condo that mom owns or in a group home or in a residential facility? What does it look like? And what do we need to do now? Because that doesn't happen overnight. But
Right.
then, most importantly, assuming that we live in a community that's ours now or similar to ours now, like assuming that Jack continues to live in this little Cincinnati suburb, um, where are the relationships? Where are the supports? What's going to happen? And I think what you were talking about before with community kind of lends itself to that. On this like interpersonal thing, if we don't start to create those relationships and gain confidence in our social emotional relationships, um, we don't just naturally get those opportunities when we turn 18 or 22 and we're out of school and be like, poof, now I go bowling on Monday nights, right? Like, so what I'm curious about from you is, especially in church communities, have you seen this work where then like adults are still flourishing with friends and Bible studies and Wednesday night dinners? And if so, how did they achieve it?
Well, I think your point as far as looking ahead, you should always be looking a step ahead. And even right now, we're talking about this as the first of the year, and people will talk to me about. So I've got some kids who are disabled or neurodivergent in my kids' ministry, getting ready for student ministry. So how many weeks ahead of time should I start preparing for that? I'm like, oh, you're already late. you know,
Yesterday.
start planning months ahead,
Yeah.
a full year ahead. So I think looking at what that particular child or young adult needs, seeing where their gaps are to where we might need to help fill those gaps or behave in a different way. Maybe they're going to be a person where they're never going to initiate a social outing because that's just not something they can do. So then we know, okay, in order for me to be their friend, I need to initiate the social outings. Okay, we're getting ready to graduate from high school. I'm going to go away from school, but this person is going to stay here in this town. I'm going to make sure that every holiday I'm home, we're going to go play basketball or go out to coffee because that's where a lot of our young adults get left behind in that the more typical young adults go off and do these different things and somebody like Jack is still living at home
Yeah.
and he still needs friends
Yeah.
and he still needs to belong. And there are, you and I have talked about this, a kid who does have differences, they want to be with their peers. They also, the safe spaces where they can be with other people who are more like them are also good. It's
Yeah.
not one or the other. It's
Yeah.
both. Different
Oh,
kids
yeah,
can have
yeah,
different needs.
entirely. Right, because then the subset of people that are at home in their parents' basements or in their childhood bedrooms is proportionately larger in their lives because so many of their high school friends have moved on to college and have moved out of town. Um, but don't you think that churches are great places for people to establish those ongoing relationships because that sense of belonging is there already and you can go to church when you're in 13th grade, so to speak,
Yes.
and that community still there. You might not still be a part of the youth group, but then the church, if done well, can create a Bible study that is inclusive very, very easily.
Yes. And I'll say you said, and they probably shouldn't be in the youth group. If they've graduated from high school, they should not be in the youth group. And I think that one that churches will do sometimes they'll say, well, developmentally, I know he's 12, but developmentally he's 5, so we're going to put him with preschoolers. Well, so what we're teaching our typical kids is if somebody is different or not at the same developmental level than I am, then they go somewhere else. That's what we're teaching them. So is it any wonder that when they get to be adults and on their own, that they're not engaging with people who are different than them? So when we keep them with their peer group, it's not just benefiting them, it's benefiting the other kids around them
Yes.
because they're learning and growing. They're growing in empathy. They're growing in understanding. So for the church, yeah, for sure. And there's some people who are really doing it well. There's With Ministries, and then I have a friend, Jess Berryhill, who she started out as a youth minister, and then her kids with disabilities were graduating from youth ministry. And so she just said, "What do you need?"
Ah,
So they continued to meet together, but not just, it wasn't just the neurodiverse young adults, it was the neurotypical kids too. And they go bowling and they go, yeah. And that's an amazing story. She She then asked them, "What do you want?" And they go, "Well, we want," this is when they're like in their 20s, "We want to be independent. We want a house." She went to her church and asked for a house. They gave her a house. They now live together. I don't know how many there are, but
that's so cool.
and they're independent and they have jobs and they landscape and they paint and they cook for each other. So there's so many things that the church can
Ah,
be. And I'm just going to say it again. I'm going to repeat it because I think it's important. It's not just about making this person who is different a project.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
about
thank you.
it's about it improves our quality of life.
Yeah. It's not it's true inclusion. It's not inspiration porn. That
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's wonderful. Kim, you are such a gift to the world, not only to this community, but to all communities. Tell everybody where they can find your book and learn more about you online.
Yeah. Kimbotto.com is my website and it's got information on how to get the book. It'll be on Amazon and you can pre-order it now and get a free ebook if you
Ooh,
order it right now. Yeah.
that's fun.
Yeah. So you can get on there. I'm on all, the socials that people are on.
And that's also at Kim Botto, right? Botto.
It's Instagram is Kim Botto. Um, Facebook is Kim D Botto because there's another Kim Botto. Oh,
Imagine that.
yeah. But KimBotto.com has all the links to all the stuff.
Okay. Thank you
But
so much
Ashley,
for
I
joining
just
us.
I want to thank you
Oh,
as a mom of a kid who came to the United States in 4th grade not speaking English and not having really a strong background in academics. I wish that I had somebody like you to help me because I didn't know when to push. I didn't know what my rights were. Um, and I mean, I tell people all the time, like you just have to like go talk to Ashley, follow Ashley, because you are and you're different. You're different in a whole bunch of ways. But one of it, you live it personally
yeah.
and you understand it professionally. So you can empathize with the parent, but then also push.
Yeah.
And you
Problem
know
solved.
that pushing needs to be made, yeah. Well, and you say IEP meetings, what do you say? Like, it's they should be collaborative and
Yeah.
fun. It's not us against them, it's us working together for what's best for the kid.
That's right. Yeah, you're supposed to be a team. In Kentucky, it's a C, but in the federal, it's team, and it's so important that we're a team. So, Kim, I'm happy you're on my team. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy you're on my team, Ashley, even though I'm almost as old as your mother. I'm happy that thank you for having friends that are out. See, look, that's an example of you. You have
Inclusive.
friends of all different ages.
I so appreciated you all when I was coaching. I don't think you ever did, but some of the moms would even sneak me in a beer at late night meets.
Oh, I didn't know that was allowed. I would have totally done it.
Oh, it totally wasn't allowed, but they'd be like, "Girl, you've been here since 7 o'clock this morning." And they, late on a Thursday night, they bring me a beer. And it was so funny. So,
Love that.
and I think that's part of it. We all learn from each other. And
Yes, we
as I'm
do.
sure I've said to you before, I remember this moment. Jack was maybe 3 or 4. I was in my basement when my laundry room was down there, unfinished, icky basement. And I had one of the most beautiful epiphanies of my life. And it really was, this is what it's all about. It's about each other. It's about interpersonal relationships.
Right.
And that's what I try to foster here. Sure, sometimes you got to get sticky, yeah, you got to meet the conflict. Sometimes that means filing due process. It means filing a lawsuit. It means, you know, firing off the email. Don't fire it off. Send a thoughtful email. Um, but it also means these soulful connections and creating communities where they don't exist. And you're doing a great
Yes.
job at that. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you. Mutual fan club.
That's right.